Okay, I believe we are live. So, welcome to Tamarah's Closet today. I'm very excited about my guest today because, as most of you who know me know that I have a huge passion for domestic animals as well as wildlife. I spent a lot of time photographing wildlife, and I'm just there. It's very near and dear to my heart. And I discovered this man through interviewing a previous guest on Tamarah's Closet, wildlife photographer Chris Fallows is the one that told me about Peter. My guest has actually been working for the past 25 years to end the illegal wildlife trade. And in 1996, he created the Active Conservation Awareness Program, which is the first international program aimed at reducing demand for endangered species products. So for this work, he was actually awarded an associate laureate in the 1998 Rolex Awards for Enterprise. So I'm just very excited to have him here with me today. He also co-founded WildAid in the year 2000 to expand on the ACAP's success with a mission to end the illegal wildlife trade by reducing demand through public awareness campaigns and providing comprehensive marine protection. And wildlife has gained the support of hundreds of celebrities, politicians, media outlets, and government officials, and they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars inundated throughout Asia. There is so much to learn about this man and about WildAid. So I really want to go ahead and bring him out and give a warm welcome to my guest, Peter Knights. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Tamarah. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I'm really glad to have you here today. It's been something I've wanted to do for a while now since I learned about you. And I always like to know a little bit about my guest's past to kind of figure out where your passions came from and how you got started. So I wanted to know a little bit about your childhood and what your earliest memory is, Peter. You know, when we're kids, sometimes we state what we want to be when we grow up, or what is your earliest memory that you have of knowing what you wanted to do or what your passions were?
Well, that's ancient history there. I've got to go back into the annals of time to dig into that one. When I was young, I didn't have any particular fascination with wildlife, I think, beyond other kids. I think all kids are fascinated by... I worked once with Peter Benchley, the author of Jaws. He said all kids love dinosaurs and sharks, you know, and I think I had the normal child interest in a lot of animals. We always had great pets and things like that and stuff. But I did have as a hobby when I was, you know, maybe, I'm trying to think back, maybe 10 or so, tropical freshwater fish, you know, the little fish you have in an aquarium. I've got a little aquarium actually next to me right now. And that fascinated me, and water has always fascinated me. Rivers, streams, and ponds has always fascinated me. And I think what I got from the aquariums, at one point I had like 6 or 7 aquariums in my bedroom, much to my parents' disdain, was that you kind of create this little mini ecosystem, and you've got to get all the bits right, otherwise it all goes to hell. And a couple of challenges are keeping an aquarium going, you know, for a long period of time. I've had aquariums running without draining them out for like 8 years, 9 years.
Wow.
You know, because if you create the right ecosystem with plants, not too many fish, the right kinds of fish, some of the bottom feeders, some of the top, they don't bully each other, etc. You create this little mini ecosystem, and you have to put exactly the right amount of light in. You have to change the water the right amount, and you get to realize how if that goes out of balance, it all goes to hell pretty quickly. And I think what that made me understand was that basically the planet is just one big aquarium, right? And if you get the inputs wrong, or you don't look after it properly, it all starts to fall apart. And so I think if I go back to anything that made me interested in the environment and wildlife and that balance between it, it was that love of fish and fascination. And, you know, I actually bred quite a lot of these things, and you have to create, you know, you have to have the right plants, you have to have the right temperature, you have to feed them the right thing. They've got to get them in the right condition, then change the water and all these things. And so I was fascinated by that. And those little micro worlds that were there. And I think that probably gave me my desire to try and do something about what I see as, like, you know, an aquarium out of control right now on the planet.
Right. And, you know, that's interesting because about 20 years ago, I tried to do the the saltwater fish aquarium, and it was so beautiful. But I couldn't keep them alive, And
much harder, and unfortunately, like a lot of the marine aquarium fish are coming still from the wild, whereas most of the freshwater are bred, captive bred, and so. And one of the definitions for me about, I don't feel that we should keep animals that we can't breed, right? Because if we can't create sufficient conditions to be comfortable enough to breed, then that animal shouldn't be in captivity. There's things like great white sharks and things, I just don't think they should be in captivity because we can't create a comfortable enough ecosystem for them to be in. And so, and the marine is very hard because obviously in the ocean, you've got a lot more oxygenation, you've got a lot more things going on. So freshwater is relatively easy from that point of view. So, but marine is very tough to keep a good balance on.
Right. So how do you feel about places like SeaWorld and things like that? Because that's...
Well, I think, there's a role for captive animals. Obviously, some people are not as fortunate as me to be able to go and see animals in the field. But I don't think there's any reason for any animal to be taken out of the wild in this day and age. If we can't breed it in captivity, then we shouldn't be having it, in my opinion. And I think there's certain animals you cannot create satisfactory conditions for them. So I think things like dolphins and orcas just shouldn't be in captivity. They're too intelligent. They're too wide ranging. You're not going to be able to create those rights and circumstances for them. And so I think, having said that, some zoos and places do a lot of conservation work and educational work. They do give people, a sort of attachment and love of animals. And so that's obviously a role, but we should not be taking any more animals for those places anymore.
Right. I think so too. Kind of bothers me. But were your parents, were they big advocates for animal and have those passions, or?
No, animal lovers. We've always had dogs and pets and things like that, but not really. And we used to, like to go for walks in the country. And, we would, on Sunday night, we would watch a TV show called The World About Us, which was David Attenborough, who's now in his 90s or whatever, that young David Attenborough, or at least a middle-aged David Attenborough. Sunday night was always watching an animal show, a wildlife show about, exploring the planet and things. And I think that might have given me, my sort of love of travel, but also, just seeing what an incredible world is out there, all these beautiful things that are going on. And I think, sometimes forget how privileged we are. We look around, there's not an awful lot of planets out there that we've found life on, if none right now. This is a very unique scenario. And it's not just, it's like we've got one bit of life. We've got this huge abundance, this huge beautiful smorgasbord of living things on this planet, and if we don't look after that, we are kind of nuts, frankly.
Yeah, right. And I used to watch some of those, what was it, the United Kingdom, that show, I don't know, it was
Wildlife Kingdom,
Omaha, whatever. And so I had a passion very early because my dad had the National Geographic magazines on a regular basis, and so I really did. That's when I took a love for all the wildlife. And but when do you remember taking notice about the illegal trade and the endangerment?
So I went to university in London School of Economics, studying economics, not really knowing what I wanted to do. Kind of going towards a business, future, but not really being convinced I wanted to do that. I worked from a very early age in different jobs and things. And my dad ran a company, a factory and things. So I worked at that factory, and every single job from sweeping the floor to doing the accounts, etc., and things like that. So I kind of had a business background, and I also spoke French and German to a degree. So I had languages, and then I did economics, which I found quite interesting. And then I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I kind of came out of the London School of Economics and started like a construction business, doing light construction work, just to sort of do something to, make some money and keep myself afloat. And I was also playing in a band at the time. And if I'd have, probably my dream at that time would have been to play in a band and be a successful musician and things. Not that
really.
Well, it was a fun thing to do, and I really enjoyed it. But also realized that it probably wasn't a very secure career, to be honest. And so I was doing that construction business, and then I wanted to try and do some volunteer work on environmental work. And I started doing some stuff with Greenpeace as a volunteer. And I ended up helping them build a hospital for seals that were dying of this mystery virus. And we just basically took this old warehouse that the council donated, and we took these confectionery bins and made these isolation units for the seals. And it was basically a very sort of Heath Robinson cobble it together hospital. But it was a really rewarding thing to do, because it was very much almost like in a war setting. You're in this crisis and you're all pulling together, and all these volunteers, and find that kind of inspirational that everyone came together with this goal, that shared goal together. And also discovered through that these seals had up to 1,000 man-made chemicals in them. And this was a virus. It was actually kind of ended up being sort of seal distemper. They think may have come from dogs and transferred from dogs into seals. But the seals were so weakened and so little immunity to this virus, because they had contamination in them. They had all these man-made chemicals, 1,000 man-made chemicals found in the blubber. So their immune system had been suppressed, and it allowed this virus to take. And so that made me realize, first of all, I didn't even know before that the seals were around England. They're not all over the place, but there are some places, Scotland, more seals and things. And then just how much pollution was out there in the environment. And of course, if it's making the seals sick, I mean, you can not too far to get it to us being sick. And so I did that work for Greenpeace. And then they said to me, well, we really like what you did on that. Would you consider this other job? And so it was a consultancy. I was still running my business. And they said, well, there's a few problems with elephants right now. A lot of elephants are being poached in Africa. And in fact, when I looked into it, it was like, the African elephant population had halved in 15 years. It had gone down from 1.5 million to 750,000, all because of the ivory trade. And nobody at that time knew about that. That was all quite quiet. This is in 1989, before a lot of the fuss came out. So they said to me, we want to find out who's selling ivory in the UK, and we want to write to them. Nothing nefarious, just want to write to them and say, do you know that ivory is causing the extinction of elephants, and try and get them to stop selling it. So I went to my professor at London School of Economics and said, I need to get this information, but I don't expect anyone's going to willingly give me, a list of all the ivory sales places. So he wrote me a letter saying I was doing a study on the economics of the ivory trade. And I got to meet the biggest ivory trader in the country, and he actually allowed me to look at his customer database. Right. So we got the addresses that we could then write to all those people and just say, do you know what's happening to elephants? So it was kind of espionage, but it was kind of not particularly nefarious at the end. The worst end of it was we write people a letter, So, but it the awareness of, what was going on with elephants. And people had just assumed that, elephants die of old age and there's ivory, which of course there is. But the trouble is we're too greedy, and we won't wait for the elephant to die. We go out and start killing the elephants.
Yeah.
So that was my first foray into wildlife trade.
Wow. Well, but now are they doing more for like pianos and stuff with a different type of?
Well, this is the history of the ivory trade. I find it fascinating and horrible at the same time.
Yeah.
The ivory was really the plastic of the Victorian age. So we were using it for piano keys, billiard balls was a big industry, combs. Anything that we used plastic for, we were using ivory. It's very durable and obviously an attractive material. And, the big consumers were Europe and the United States. And so historically, and that unfortunately, the ivory trade was intrinsically linked with the slave trade. So they would have to have slaves to carry the ivory out, because they couldn't have pack animals because the tsetse flies would kill them. And so they would go and raid places and take a bunch of people as bearers to bring this ivory out. When they get to the coast, they'd turn to like, oh, well, actually, by the way, you are a slave now. And so there's this horrible industry, a symbiotic relationship between the slave trade and ivory, which went on in those colonial times. And, I'm sure you've seen the movie Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
So, that's based on Joseph Conrad's book, and Heart of Darkness. And the original Colonel Kurtz was actually an ivory trader. And so the craziness was going on all around the Belgian Congo time, where they were chopping people's hands off, all kinds of horrible things. But it was the ivory trade. And so, a lot of people don't understand that terrible history of ivory. And then it kind of died down a bit. And then it came back again in the 1960s and 70s, where the market, instead of there was some in the US and there was some in Europe for carvings and things, but also Japan in particular, they have these stamps that they use called handcodes. And this became an industrial industry. And although there was supposed to be controls on it, they were basically flouting all the controls and using the legal trade to launder all this poached ivory. and elephants just getting decimated all over Africa under supposedly a regulated system. And that ended, thankfully, in 1989, which is kind of when I entered the scene. And the Environmental Investigation Agency that I worked for then was investigating and proving how all these permits were being abused, and ivory's being shipped here and there and pretending it came from here when it was there. This whole mess of a system, which was basically leading, would have led eventually to the extinction of the elephant.
Wow. And that would be horrible. I mean, I guess my first experience, and only experience with elephants, was when I was a kid with the circus. But, I would love to see them on a safari or something like that.
There's nothing more peaceful, I don't think, personally, than sitting quietly in a vehicle and watching a herd of elephants walk past you, just gently. They're all feeding, and they will come in most of the parks in Africa where they haven't been hunted or poached. They'll come within literally inches of the vehicle. Last year, I took my daughter there, and we were in an open vehicle where this massive bull elephant came literally. I could have reached out and touched it. It was right in the window in the open vehicle, completely calm, just checking us out. And it's just a very humbling experience that something so big and so large that we've done so many horrible things to can hang out with us, basically. And it's just, in a non-aggressive way. There's nothing more peaceful, I don't think, than hanging out with a herd of elephants.
Oh, I would love it. And they're not bothered by you. They're not.
It depends on the circumstances, but generally speaking, in places where they've been used to having tourists there, no, they're not bothered. And if you, go too close to a child or a baby, they'll get bothered. I mean, but they're not naturally aggressive animals. They're naturally quite calm animals. In some places they have been hunted or where they've come into conflict with crops and things, then people have thrown spears at them, and then that'll change. And if you go to an area where they've done trophy hunting, the elephants won't come anywhere near you. But in the circumstances around tourism, it's very possible and very safely get very close to these elephants, and they're completely not aggressive in that format. So it's an adventure that I think everybody, if they can, should do. And actually, by going and seeing them, you are actually helping to save them, because you are putting money into those local economies. So therefore, people are prepared to tolerate elephants, because they're getting money back from the tourism and things. And so particularly now in COVID, it's very sad because a lot of the anti-poaching efforts are compromised because there is no tourism. So there's no money coming in. So there's no income to protect the elephants. So I would encourage people, if they get the chance to go to Africa, do go. I mean, it'll change your life. I mean, nobody I've ever been with or taken to Africa has never not come back and said, I'm going back again, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
The experiences there, it's very safe. It's not, some people are scared of this and that. I feel a lot safer in parts of Africa than I do in, sort of some areas of Los Angeles, for example. People shouldn't be worried about going. And now, it's relatively easy. And thankfully, they haven't been hit as badly by COVID. And, saying to people, it's like, well, if you want to be socially isolated, go in a Jeep and not safari. It's just the animals.
Well, that's wonderful. Did you? I've got to do that sometime. Did you do any kind of projects when you were a kid? Like, I know you had all the fish and all that, but
no, not really. I mean, but just when I started doing this environmental work, I did feel very strongly that human beings need to work together. There's too many of us on this planet to just fight each other the whole time. We need to kind of work collectively together. And I do think that the environment is the one thing that makes it really clear. It doesn't really matter if you're rich or your religion or whatever. You can't breathe the air or drink the water or, have life sustained. We're all in trouble. And at some point, we've got to realize that we have to learn to share, right? And we have to learn to cooperate and collaborate. And we have to keep this thing going. And I think that was my kind of bigger motivation. And then just the animals became part of it because I was introduced to this specific element. And once I found that, I'm like, wow, wouldn't people be terrified if they thought half the elephants disappeared in the last 15 years? Wouldn't that be a wake-up call? And from there, I just started to do more and more wildlife activity and got deeper and deeper into this area. The next thing I worked on was the wild bird trade. And this was parrots and finches being caught in Africa and Latin America and then shipped to go in cages in the United States and in Europe. And many of them would die on the way because, again, these are wild animals. When they're put into cages and all stuck together with multiple species, they get very stressed out. They get disease problems. A lot of them die. They're stressed. I mean, for a wild animal, when it's taken into captivity, it's like every minute you're feared for your life, right? It's like you think you're going to die any second. That's the only thing your brain can compute, is if I can't run away, I'm in trouble. And so it's hugely stressful. And we had a big campaign basically to say to people, if you want a bird as a pet, get a captive bred bird. You know, it's a species that is better adapted to captivity. It means, you know, it hasn't been in the wild. It hasn't been stressed. It's, you know, less likely to bite you. It's less likely to have disease. Lots haven't died on the way to get there. You can have your pet bird, just don't buy a wild bird. And so that campaign went on with the Environmental Investigation Agency. We managed to get the wild bird imports to the United States down from about 850,000 to about 40,000 just for breeding purposes. And then we managed to get a whole load of airlines to stop shipping the wild birds, because what we found is that the reason people weren't buying captive bred birds was they were more expensive than wild birds. And so if you actually didn't have the competition from the cheap imports, the bird breeders could breed more of the birds, and everyone could have a captive bred bird. And actually they came back the next year after we passed this bill and said it's been very successful, because bird breeding has just exploded, because now you can do it economically, whereas before you couldn't. You know, to breed a bird might cost you $150. People can get it from the wild for $5. They pay somebody, and, you know, you can't compete. So the consumers were more happy because they had healthy birds that were basically tame and disease-free. And so, you know, it worked out. And then there weren't animals like, you know, we looked at the blue-fronted Amazon parrots being endangered, because to catch these birds, they were chopping down the trees they nested in and taking the chicks out. So destroying the habitat, depleting the species, then a bunch of them were dying on the way. It was just, you know, really bad scenario.
Yeah. Well, so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've not ever wanted to capture a bird or anything, but it's just not been my thing.
I worked on that for 4 years, and I realized, you know, I went to Argentina and saw these Amazon blue-fronted parrots who have these spectacular colors on their wings. And I realized I'd never seen these colors, because every bird I'd seen before that had been in a cage, and it hadn't been able to even spread its wings. And it's kind of like, well, that's just awful. You know, the law in England at that time was that someone argued seriously that it was okay. The law said that the bird has to be able to spread its wings. And someone was arguing, well, it can sit at this end of the cage and go like that, and then it goes to the other end and go like that. Therefore, it can spread its wings.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, how is that for these? And if you know parrots at all, they're very, very intelligent birds. They communicate. They've had an African grey parrot that could learn like abstract ideas like color. You could say, which is the blue object? And it would point to the blue object. And that's kind of an abstract idea, right? But the parrots could do that. They're very smart. They live for a long time. And, you know, many of the species mate for life. And so you're putting this very artificial situation. They're kind of bored, incredibly bored from it. A lot of them pluck out their feathers. It's just not very nice. And so, you know, there is an alternative, which is captive bred. And, you know, that's the way to go if anybody wants a pet bird.
Right. Oh, yeah, for sure. I know I've recently befriended a squirrel, and you know, I don't put it in a cage. It's just got to where it'll come to me. I call it, and it comes to me and eats out of my hand and stuff like that. And I've gotten real attached to it, but I could never cage it, you know, and keep it. You know, I just
look. I mean, wild animals are not ideal to interact with human beings, other than on the observation level, to be honest. We'll get to this, but, you know, the whole COVID thing, it may likely have had origins in taking wild animals. We know that, you know, HIV, SARS, H1N1, there's a load of new diseases come from wildlife. And in fact, the CDC says that 3/4 of emerging diseases are from wildlife. You know, because we caught a lot of that diseases from, a lot of people don't know this, but a lot of diseases we caught from domesticated animals when we domesticated them. So, you know, we got a lot of things from pigs and chickens and cows. When we lived in close proximity to them, we were butchering them. We got a lot of diseases from them, which we now have, and now human diseases, but they came originally from zoonosis, from animals. And so when you look at the wildlife trade, I was talking about the birds, but it's almost like a lab design of how would you get a disease to jump from another species to another species. You take these animals from the wild, increasingly from areas, you know, like they've been deforested, they've been remote, that people haven't really been exposed to. And then we ship them and we stress them out, but they mix them with other species. We don't feed them properly. We don't give them proper water. These are all, and then we stack them on top of each other, and they're sneezing and coughing and pooping on each other. It's almost a petri dish for creating this species to species disease jump, which is normally where these new diseases come from. They jump from one species to another, and then usually to humans, and then it's mutating along the way. And so we've seen this so many times now with Ebola as another one. It's the obvious place for a new emerging disease to come from. And we've known this for quite a long time. We've had these things. HIV, it didn't come out really till 15 years later that it actually came from monkeys. And then chimpanzees ate the monkeys, and then we ate the chimpanzees, and we got it probably when we were butchering chimpanzees for bushmeat. So, that connection hasn't been very, very strongly. Now, in the case of COVID, they're pretty certain now it came originally from horseshoe bats. And bats, tend to carry viruses because they have a very high metabolism and high temperature. They can survive viruses, which, would kill other animals sexually. And so from there, but they don't think it went straight from humans, from bats. And so one of the theories currently out there is it went from the horseshoe bat to the pangolins, and pangolins to humans. And it's not confirmed by any means, but this is the only vector species I've heard put forward at this point, is the pangolins. And we do know that pangolins do carry coronaviruses, and we do know they carry other viruses and diseases which can be passed to human beings. And we know they're in the wildlife trade, and we know they're usually transported live, right up to the point of sale, essentially. In one case, even, there is a dish where people have raw pangolin blood on rice. So if you're a transmitted disease, drinking fresh raw blood is a pretty effective way of doing it. So this is madness. And what we haven't seen before is this incredible economic impact of a disease, right? HIV came over long, and over the years it became a huge economic impact, but it didn't close down economies and things and stuff like that. So we hope that this is a warning sign, a canary in the coal mine, to say, look, this wildlife trade for human consumption is just a really crazy idea, and we need to end it now. And so that's one of our big campaigns now, is to try and get these poor pangolins, which is these scaly anteaters, who are all endangered. 8 species, they're all endangered. It's the most trafficked mammal in the world. And it reproduces very slowly, maybe has one baby every 2 years or so. So really can't cope with any kind of exploitation. It's being heavily exploited. And it has this disease risk. And so we're hoping that the COVID, post-COVID, the governments where this is all going on are going to be like, okay, we need to close this down. We need to stop it. We need to educate the public, move away from consuming these wild animals, which have a high disease risk.
In the pangolin, its attraction is just to eat. That's what people.
Well, it's eaten, the meat's eaten, and also the scales. It has these keratin scales. Keratin is in your fingernails. It's in your hair. It's a very common building block of mammals, and rhino horn is keratin, for example. And these scales are keratin, and they are used in traditional Chinese medicine for sometimes to help women that are having trouble with breastfeeding, with rheumatism, this whole variety of things, usually in combination with a bunch of herbs. And there's nothing that they don't have alternatives in traditional medicine for. So all the treatments, there are herbal alternatives they can use. And most practitioners don't use pangolin, and they will use other things. But some of these preparations do. So there's the demand for the scales. And so we've had literally, dozens and dozens of sacks of scales being confiscated in different, up to 10 tons of scales in single seizures of these poor little pangolins. And then the meat is eaten in Asia, but it's also eaten in Africa as well. And we were just in November, just before COVID, we were making a film with Jaimin Honsu, the actor, in Nigeria. And they were there. I mean, pangolins openly on sale in the markets. We rescued them and put them back into the wild. But basically, it's an ongoing problem of that consumption. And with it, the risk of disease transmission. And this was in Lagos, right, which is a city of 22 million people. So this is not a remotely out in a forest somewhere. This is in a major city. So if that something did come from that, it's going to spread very, very quickly. And when you look at COVID, the Chinese government initially, it's all been it's all political now, but at the time they basically closed down these wildlife markets that were in China. And they have actually now, they're talking about closing down 80,000 breeding facilities for different wildlife in China now as a result of this disease, because they did have SARS before, which definitely came from bats to civets. to humans. And so SARS was kind of a warning, but then they reopened these wildlife markets. And now I think they're like, well, okay, we made a huge mistake. We're going to stop that. What they're talking about moving the future, which I think is a sensible approach, is they're only going to allow 12 species for human consumption. And it's like 4 deer species and 8 bird species, things like grouse and pheasant. And then obviously the deer is kind of venison, which obviously we here in the United States and in Europe, some game animals, wild animals, which we've been eating for a long time, pretty low risk. But that's not civet cats and penguins. They're high risk for disease.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, because I didn't know anything about the penguin until I saw your interview on CNN, and then kind of researched it a little more on your website. So, yeah.
They're super cute little animals, little anteaters, and eat termites and ants, and don't bother anybody, and really don't have any predators. Because they have this scales, they roll into a ball, and even lions can't get this ball undone. They're not designed to have predation on them because they kind of don't really have the things that can eat them except human beings. So again, we enter the equation, we disturb the whole ecosystem, and who knows what the long-term damage of that is.
Right, exactly. Well, but when you went to school in London, it sounds like you really didn't know what you were going to do when you went to study economics. But did you have any idea that you wanted to do any kind of investigative work into wildlife? Or
not at all. I mean, that's when I left the Greenpeace job, and I'd done that. I met these guys at the Environmental Investigation Agency, and they were doing all this undercover investigation with hidden cameras and stuff like that. And very exciting. It's like James Bond without the cars and the women. It's just like the secret cameras and fake companies and things like that. So I got into that, and that's what took me into wildlife, really, from there. And I think, the irony, I think, of this is that, very often you go through things in life and you think, well, that was a wrong turn, or that didn't make any sense, or like, why did I need an economics degree to become an undercover investigator? But actually, after doing the investigations for a while and looking into all these different trades in Africa and Asia and all over the world, I used my economics. And my economics was that almost all the efforts on conservation have been supply side efforts. So trying to protect the animals in the field, anti-poaching, scientific study, all on the supply side. And as an economist, what was clear is that you needed to do something about the demand. Because if you, in economics, say, for example, you ban ivory. If all you do is ban ivory, all you're doing is restricting the supply. And what that usually means is it just pushes the price up. That's basic economics. So what you actually need to do when you make that ban, you actually need to move the demand curve. You need to reduce the demand. And that can be done through education. It can be done through public awareness, etc. But everybody was just closing down the market and saying, oh, we've done it. And it's like, no, but you've just banned it. You haven't persuaded the people that were buying it that it was wrong to buy it. And so to me, as an economist, it's like all you're going to do is push the price up. And opponents of bans would say that. But my thing was, actually, if you use the ban and the education around it to reduce the demand curve, you are actually going to solve the problem. And so my economics told me that this was the way to go about it. But most of conservation is biologists, not economists. And so they've all been looking at this other end of it. And like, you're missing this whole thing. As, for example, I think we are with drugs. We've spent trillions and trillions of dollars trying to suppress the supply of drugs. Almost no impact. Some people say it's worse now than it ever has been. Street prices are lower than ever, etc. I would say you need to deal with the demand. You'll never succeed until you do something about the demand. And so, and the demand on drugs, there have been some efforts. Some of them have been actually successful on the demand side, and even stuff like needle exchange. That's the demand side approach. Those things seem to have helped in different ways. So, you need to look at the demand, and then it's okay. So we need to do demand. How do we do it? And you say, well, who's been involved in demand? Well, the advertising industry is all about increasing demand, right? It's all about creating more demand for a product. Right. So our theory was, my theory was like switch it on its head and use the advertising industry and all the tricks of the advertising industry to reduce the demand. By making things not socially desirable, but socially undesirable. And so we went to this time in Asia, the advertising was frankly not very sophisticated. It's got way, way more sophisticated now, but at that time it wasn't. And so we went to actually the UK and advertising, actually J. Walter Thompson there, and said, I want to use the most clever and impelling advertising techniques to try and persuade people not to buy these products. And then we went and said, okay, so what else do you do as a corporate? Well, you try and get like some good spokespeople, right? You try and get ambassadors for your brand that promote your brand. And so we approached Jackie Chan, who obviously was the biggest star in Asia, probably still is,
Yeah.
all over, hugely well known, hugely loved and respected. And thankfully, he said yes. And so we tried to, and from when Jackie joined, we've been working with now for 25 years or so. But after he'd done it, a bunch of other celebrities said, oh, we'd like to do this too. We understand there's a problem with this and we'd like to be part of it. And so now we've had over probably 250 ambassadors. People like Yao Ming, Jay Chou, who's a huge star over there, David Beckham, Prince William, Leo DiCaprio, Harrison Ford, mainly Asian celebrities, because that's mainly where we're talking to, but African, American, European, loads of different people who've come on as ambassadors for this program. And what we've essentially done is a massive advertising campaign where we haven't paid for the talent, that they've all donated their services. And then the key thing has been the media in Asia has donated the space to run the messages. So the big factor, you said earlier we'd raised hundreds of millions of dollars. I wish I had, but I haven't. But I have raised hundreds of millions of dollars of media space.
Okay.
Right? So it's donated. So, last year, for example, we got about $225 million worth of media space donated. And so that's the expensive bit, so you can run these massive campaigns, which are kind of on the level of a Coca-Cola or someone else or Nike would run, but you're not paying the advertising costs. And so through that, you get this message out there repeatedly. You start to change the image of these wildlife products. Instead of being this desirable, cool thing, it's like, no, I don't want to go near that. Jackie Chan says it's not cool. Yao Ming says it's not cool. Jay Chou says it's not cool. And that gets into people's psyche. And it's like, what? And you also, during that, you show them how the animals are killed, why they're endangered. You have the education, the messages too. And ultimately, they decide that's not such a good thing to buy anymore.
Now, are you having to pay these ambassadors to do this?
No. Obviously, if we paid them, then they'd just be doing what we paid them to say. They all donate their time and effort.
Yeah,
so
that's what I paid.
The amount of time we've had from various different celebrities and athletes over the time. I mean, that's there. But we're not asking people for money. We're asking them to not buy the products. So it's about signing up to a cause. It's not about endorsing WildAid or giving money to WildAid. It's about saying we agree that we shouldn't kill elephants anymore for ivory. We agree we shouldn't kill rhinos for rhino horn. And so it's been, I think, one of the largest ever international campaigns. It's been running for a long time now. And we've seen some incredible results. So the shark fin imports to China are down by more than 80%. The price of rhino horn is down by more than 2/3. The price of ivory is down by more than 2/3. And since we've run all these campaigns, the poaching has gone down of those animals too. Partly because there's been better enforcement, but largely because the price has gone down. So the incentive to poach is much less. The amount of money that you can bribe people with is less. And so by doing you have to do the anti-poaching, of course, you have to do on the ground stuff. By working at the demand at the same time, you're actually able to see real long-term progress. And what we've also found is in many of these societies or places where this goes on, once society has moved on from it, it doesn't just flip back again. It's like a once and for all awareness change where people just realize wildlife products are not such a good idea. Because it's not usually sustainable and it usually involves cruelty, often involves criminality, and it's just not something you should be doing. So first place we kind of did this in really was Taiwan, and that was back in 1995. And at that time, Taiwan was like the biggest destination for rhino horn and various other things and had all kinds of wildlife problems going on. And in about 2 or 3 years, it flipped. It was a huge campaign, had the US government and sanctions and things like that. But basically the country flipped and has no longer been a major source of demand for most of these products. So what we saw is that, this is a once-off societal change. And once it's done, you've done it. And so the enforcement has to go on forever. So compared to putting all your eggs into the enforcement basket, this is a real winning long-term solution. And beyond even just stopping the demand, what we've also found is you're turning people into conservationists. So they don't just stop consuming wildlife, but then they want to go and see animals in Africa and positively engage with wildlife. They want to support conservation programs. And so, the Chinese government and Chinese individuals now are supporting conservation programs in Africa because part of that education process has made them fall in love with animals and see that there's a need for their help. So the long-term goal is to, move people from being consumers to being conservationists.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, when you have investigations, like I know you said, you told me before we went live, your current investigations are more like the rhinos and the elephants and sharks
Yeah.
and the pangolins. How do you get started? What is involved in getting a new campaign started? Like, how do you
Well,
get that?
we don't do so much of the investigation work anymore. I kind of hung up my spurs when people started having photographs of me, and it didn't seem to be good as being an undercover person. If you've got people, if bird traders got photos on the wall of you, you're kind of like, maybe not undercover anymore. But other organizations are doing that exposure work. But the other thing was really that what we found is that the exposure is great. Doing an expose is great, but you do an expose, you 60 minutes, blah blah. Everyone talks about it for a week, and it's gone. And we really need this much longer term, sort of more pervasive, ongoing effort through the advertising. And ultimately, we didn't need, Westerner Peter Knights telling Chinese people this was bad. What we needed is Jackie Chan and Yao Ming to say, I don't think we should do this anymore. People of the local currency, local race, local beliefs, etc., talking to their peers rather than Americans lecturing them or Europeans. And so, that has been the kind of thing we've done. And so what we do, a new campaign, we first of all, we're just working now, starting in Nigeria, which is a major country for ivory smuggling, pangolin, scales, and has this big bushmeat trade going on. And so we'll approach the local government. We'll do some investigation work. So we've just done a survey about bushmeat consumption and what kind of bushmeat people eat and why they eat it. And the good news on that, by the way, is that very few people say it's essential to have bushmeat. They say, oh, we could have fish or we could have chicken instead. It's like, great, so let's have fish and chicken, please. But we go and approach local partners, local organizations in the field. So usually we have a local organization we work with as a partner. And it's all about collaboration. And then we'll try and get the local government ministries on board. So we'll have an environment minister in Nigeria. We're talking to the Nigerian CDC, because on this bushmeat, there's this disease risk. Try and get some partners on board locally so we can work with them, tap into their expertise, and have it as a joint effort. That it's not just some foreign group coming in and doing it, but it's a group of people coming together with common interests. And then we'll try and talk and recruit to some prominent Nigerians. We already have on the campaigns, we've had Lupita Nyong'o, from Kenya. We've had Denai Guerrera, who was born in Zimbabwe. We've got Jaimin Hunsu, who is in Togo. Benin. This comes from Benin. And so we'll try and get some local ambassadors. We have soccer players sometimes. We have religious leaders, which has been amazing in some cases. So in Tanzania, for example, we had Muslim, Christian, evangelical, all these different religious leaders all came together to say, poaching is immoral. Basically, this is good. It's God's creation, and we shouldn't be desecrating it like this. And it was wonderful to see all these people coming together and saying, hey, we may disagree on something, but we all agree on this. And so we'll try and get, local icons, local leaders, maybe ex-politicians, maybe authors, anybody that's prominent and people recognize, and see if we can bring them into the campaign and have them as spokespeople. Very often in Africa, what we do is we take them out to see the animals, so they can have that experience for them. And one of the most amazing things that I've been doing is really taking people to visit their own country, which sounds crazy, but taking people that have never seen an elephant, who've lived in Africa, all their life, and they've been maybe 50 miles, 100 miles away from being able to see an elephant, have never thought to even do it. And it's not because they didn't have the money, because these are pop stars and various people. It's just never occurred to them to go and do it. And every time they love it. Every time they're blown away, and every time they're like, I got to bring my family. I didn't even realize this was here. This is incredible. Like watching National Geographic, like, yeah, it's right on your doorstep, and it actually can be done affordably. And so that's been tremendous to see people like learning about their own wildlife and then becoming kind of hooked on it. And so those people then become ambassadors. We try and take them out, and so they can speak from their own personal experience rather than saying, oh, say this. It's like, no, go and see it, feel it for yourself, understand the issues, and be a spokesperson on it. And so with Jaimin, we took him and he went to the bushmeat markets. He went into South Africa and saw a pangolin in the wild. So he could actually speak from his own personal experience. And we're making a documentary with him on that. So, you go in, you try and orient, try and get local people already working on this together and do something new that hasn't been done and fresh, and inspire people with a sense of, when it comes to Africa, the wildlife generates a lot of money and a lot of jobs. Not so now to COVID, unfortunately, but basically there's millions and millions of dollars in tourism in Africa. and people depend on that, and it brings foreign currency into the country. So people understand that when someone's poaching, they're not just killing that animal, they're actually stealing from the entire country. And so you get that notion, to get the sense of pride, which I've never ceased to be amazed how even people in the village sometimes can be proud of wildlife. It's there and it's local. What makes this place what it is. Getting that sense of pride from people, and that gives you the will to say we need to protect this. We shouldn't just let people steal it, because basically poaching is stealing. It's fair.
Right. Well, how did you? So you went from London. You're in San Francisco. Is that? Yeah. How you do so much of your work abroad, right? So how did you?
That's partly why I ended up in San Francisco, because when we were doing this out of London, and at one point I was going to 8 countries on a trip, a 2-week trip. I'd go to 8 countries, and I would go in and meet up with my local partner, talk about, we're going to do this and this, and I'll go and do this, you do that, I'll see you in 3 weeks time, and whiz off to the next country literally a day later. And this was like Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, Hong Kong, Taipei, just zipping around regionally in Asia. And then I go back to England, and then I get back, I'm like, oh, now I need to raise money for all this stuff, and I'd have to get on a plane and go to America. So I'm like, crazy. It's like, I'm never going to be in one place. And it was this catalyzing thing that we were doing, getting these people going as a catalyst, and then working together with all these partners to make a big product at the end of it. So I ended up saying, I'm just going to have to move to the States, because otherwise I'll never be at home. Because fundraising is a lot of this, especially when you were starting. A lot of the effort has to be fundraising. And there's a lot more foundations here. There's a lot more, the tax system is a lot more incentive for people to donate over here. And so this is where, the funding base had to come from. So after a while, and also I like the US system a little bit better, in terms of, this was when the European Union was just starting. And it's like, okay, so instead of having to work with just the British government, now I have to work with 25 different governments if I want to do something. And in the US, there's one government, right? And you can go in, and I was really impressed how the US civil servants, the people like the Fish and Wildlife Service, were really receptive to NGOs. They wanted to know what was going on. I mean, some countries, people see NGOs as a nuisance. It's like, no, leave us alone. We don't want to, we want to just do our thing. Here, people, no, what are you doing? What are you up to? What do you hear about this? What there? And a real willingness to want to get engaged. And that very much impressed me. And so I first of all moved to Washington, D.C., and then was offered a job in San Francisco running a foundation doing this kind of work. And so I came to San Francisco, and, it's probably the most European city in the US, I'd say, in some ways. And so obviously a beautiful climate here, wonderful. Quite progressive on things like conservation, tends to do environmental legislation ahead of the world in many cases. And so I've ended up settling here, and now, it'd be hard to go back to England because of the rain, frankly, and the miserable winters.
I know. Well, I like your slogan too. When the buying stops, the killing can too. Is that a recent slogan, or is that?
That's been going for 20 years, and and that's part of the key to this. And people say, well, why have your campaigns worked and other people's don't? And it's like, well, first of all, that slogan in Chinese is actually even simpler. It basically says no trading, no killing. So no buying or selling, no killing. And it's very simple. Almost everyone in China knows this, bizarrely. And it's almost got this thing now where people quote it as a saying, not as an advertising slogan, it's a saying. It's like, as the saying says, no trading, no killing. And government people are quoting it. The public are quoting it. I went to one pretty obscure place in China, and somebody said to me, oh, everyone in China knows your slogan. I said, well, that's very kind of you to say that, but I don't think it's true. He called the waiter. I said, what's the slogan about conservation? The guy gives me the slogan. I'm like, it really got out massively. And we did a big campaign around the Beijing Olympics in 2008. And we basically had 20 Olympic athletes all doing these messages. So this got out all over national TV, all over the country. And, we've had campaign after campaign after campaign using the same slogan. So this is almost like just do it. It's like it's got into people's minds. It's there. And so that's been out there for a long time. And so what that means is like a brand. So when you start talking about shark fin and people get it, it's cruel the way they do it. It's causing depletion of sharks, etc. They get it. And so when you then do something on elephants, like, okay, this is the same thing. It's like we're taking too many too quickly. It involves cruelty to the animals as well as depletion of the species. And so you kind of build on each thing you've done previously, just as you would with a brand. And so that's part of, I think, the reason we've been successful is this thing has been going on for an awful long time. We've built a very strong brand, and everything we do now rests on the shoulders of that brand that's come before. Whereas a lot of people do campaigns, they'll do like a 3 to 6 month campaign and that's it. And they walk away. That's not enough to make the change. We say something, we keep going, until we make the change. And sometimes it takes longer and sometimes it's shorter, depending on the issue and the complexity. But the bottom line is, you don't go in and say, oh, we're going to do 6 months, it'll be done. You can't possibly predict that. And sometimes you get big things that help you, strokes of luck. So on the shark fin campaign, one thing that really, really helped was the Chinese government had a crackdown on corruption, ironically, on austerity, so that government officials were told you can't go out for these extravagant meals. And one of the things on that was shark fin. And so that was like, we'd already put in people's minds shark fin is not good. And the government says, oh, no, you shouldn't do it. It's like, bang, game over. It's like there's, we already knew why we shouldn't do it. And now we're being told don't do it. Same with ivory. When we got to the ivory ban in China, the survey we did, 95% of people agreed with the ivory ban because they already understood what the elephant problem was, because of the campaigns. And so when it came in, they just, oh, the government's done it. Good. Finally, it's done. As opposed to, why on earth are they banning ivory? So you've got to have this public education going before you even have these bans so that the public understands, and supports the ban, as opposed to, like a prohibition on alcohol where none of the public supported it, right? It was a disaster. Nobody supported it. Everyone flouted it. It wasn't given for the health reason. It was just done arbitrarily. That doesn't work. You've got to set the ground for that prohibition of why, and then people understand, okay, I get it, why. That's fine. I get it.
Right. But your focus now is kind of primarily the rhinos, elephants, and
we have to keep doing all these things at a different level. But, so, the ivory was still, now the ivory is in good position, but we are still doing, for example, what's happening now is it's not really available in China, but sometimes Chinese tourists are going to Vietnam or Laos or Myanmar, where this stuff is still openly on sale in some cases. And so we've shifted our campaigns to those places. So it's a little bit like whack-a-mole, but each time the mole gets smaller. So we're still doing ivory work. We're still doing rhino horn work, even though, as I say, the back of the price has been broken. And the poaching, particularly this year in COVID, has gone right down of rhinos. But we still need to do that. So now, for example, on rhino horn, we're doing a campaign which focuses in on collectors of carvings of rhino horn, as opposed to the medicine. So, we kind of are going on the sort of downward slope, if you like, of that problem. Whereas the pangolin thing is still kind of going up. We're very much focused on that. And we're doing stuff on sea turtles where, the shell of sea turtles is being used in China. So we're also looking at different markets. And then the other thing we've moved to is to Africa. So we're looking at the supply side and saying, well, we've managed to get the demand down. Now some of the more pressing problems are at the supply end again. And because there's not enough will to do the anti-poaching. So we're doing public campaigns to get the will on anti-poaching. And another thing of a down the line problem is, as we reduce the elephant poaching, now human wildlife conflict, where elephants, are coming into people's fields and things like that to eat crops, that's become more of a problem. So there was more elephants killed in Kenya last year, for example, from human wildlife conflict, where people are killing the elephants because they're raiding their crops, than there was for poaching, for ivory. So we've actually started working now on a project I'm really excited about, but it's a repellent for elephants. And it's basically the smelly concoction of chili and garlic and cow dung that's fermented. And then it's all organic, all locally available. And then you spray it on the crops and the elephants can't stand the taste. And they also don't like it. They'll come up to a line and smell it and turn around and go the other way. So we're looking at that as a solution to, the next problem for elephants, which is human wildlife conflict. And the other answers have been things like electric fences, which are obviously way too expensive for many people in Africa to have an electric fence and maintain it. It's just too expensive. So we're trying to look for a locally available, cost-effective alternative to that.
Right. And when you campaign about the sharks, is that a tricky one? Just because, so many people are, well, I know I'm terrified of sharks, but, and then, because then you hear about a shark attack and everybody's like,
you and Donald Trump. The sharks. The sharks, it's quite interesting because, of course, we forget, but Jaws didn't really come out in China, right? It was at that time, Western movies were not really shown in China. So They don't have the same Jaws hangover that there's still a million terrible movies about sharks. But the other thing that we found out was the Chinese Mandarin for shark fin is fish wing. It doesn't mention shark, right? So people didn't even necessarily know that it was shark. People also didn't know that sharks, and many people don't know that sharks are really more like mammals in their reproduction strategy. So they produce very well-developed young, as opposed to something like a tuna, which produces millions and millions of eggs. So it's a different survival strategy. And so, of course, that served sharks well for millions of years. You know, sharks have been around for millions and millions of years, one of the oldest species. And that strategy served them well until human beings enter the equation. And then we start taking way too many of them out way too quickly, and the whole thing goes out of balance again. So, you know, when on sharks, people didn't know that basic information. And some people thought the fins grew back. You know, so there's all this lack of understanding. But we were able to, largely Yao Ming, the basketball player, who's been an incredible spokesperson for us. And of course, at the time of the Beijing Olympics, carried the flag. He was the greatest hero in the country. He was like the symbol of China and the sort of the growth of China. And he was our ambassador, which we couldn't have picked anyone better than Yao. And, you know, gradually through all these different people being involved, the story of Shark Fin came out, and it became, and then the government sort of said, yeah, and you shouldn't do it also because it's kind of showy and wasteful and it's there. So all these things came together to turn it around. But, you know, we had footage of people, fishermen, chopping the fins off and throwing the shark overboard live. You know, he's obviously going to die, but live, and just taking the fins off. And that image we managed to get out all over television. And people still today come up to me and say like, oh, shark fin, yeah, it's terrible. Have you seen how they kill them? And I'm like, yeah, I probably showed you that footage, frankly. That affected a lot of people. And what it wasn't that people were doing it, you know, out of malice. They were doing it out of ignorance. They had no idea what was behind it. And once they did, they wanted to do the right thing. And that's generally been my experience of all these things, is that, you know, people are going like, oh, terrible people in China don't care about animals. It's like, no, they don't. But there's things they don't understand. And when they understand them, they actually can care just as much as people in the West. And if you look at Chinese culture and Asian culture historically, it's actually way more respectful of nature than Western consumerism is. You know, so it's not a racial thing. It's sometimes what I've found is it's a sort of historical cultural thing where when a society becomes sort of very wealthy very quickly, as we saw in Japan and we saw in places like Taiwan and Hong Kong, and then later China, people start spending money on this stuff. And it gets out of control until they learn that it's not actually a good thing to do, and then they move on. And so it's kind of a cultural development thing and an economic development thing. At a certain point in economic development, this sort of stuff comes in. Just as we used to have snake oil here in the States, you know, here in California and the gold rush, people were saying snake oil.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think you're right. People, when they're not educated on something, they fear it. And, you know, like with me, with sharks, when I say I'm afraid of them, I just don't want to swim with them, but I've never wanted them to be killed. And I spent like 2 or 3 weeks in a row when I'd get home from the studio watching Shark Week, different shows, and the one that Cliff Fallows was on, and I'd watch the one he was on. And
do you know why we're fascinated by shark attacks? Because they're so rare.
Oh,
yeah. I mean, you know, this is the whole thing, is that there's like 8 to 10 fatal shark attacks a year out of 7.6 billion people. And you think about how much time we spend in the water now. And usually shark attacks are mistakes by the shark. The shark thinks it's something else. The shark thinks that someone on a surfboard with their legs out is the silhouette of a turtle, and they attack it, and they usually attack it and then leave it because like, that wasn't what I thought it was. And so these are sort of random accidents. And, you know, so many people get killed by dogs and millions of other things. I mean, this
sure.
And, you know, if you have the chance, you know, another amazing experience I've had in filming and things is swimming with sharks, you know, and we used to take trips down to Mexico, to Cancun, to swim with whale sharks. Because like these, 25-foot giant fish, totally peaceful, totally placid, and you can get right next to them and they don't mind. It's like they're fine. They don't care. And they're eating the tiny, tiny plankton. And then in the Bahamas, you can go and swim with like the lemon sharks and things like that, and the reef sharks there. And again, they'll just come around you, and they're absolutely calm and non-aggressive. And so again, it's about what you know and how you do it. But again, you know, there's a big future for shark diving, and it's a major industry now.
Right. Well, I learned a lot watching that, and I enjoyed it. I learned so much about the shark and so much information that I didn't even know about the sharks. So actually it helped me even more so want to, you know, keep them around, even though I never wanted them not to be there. I just didn't want to get in the water with them. You know, but I had a bunch of...
First time I went down diving in Galapagos with hammerhead sharks it's the first time I've been diving with sharks, actually, you know, open water sharks and things. And the dive master says to me, it's like, look, you know, when they go down, you see the shark, don't breathe, hold your breath if you can. And they tell you never to do that in diving, but you say, because the sharks are terrified of your bubbles. I'm like, the shark's afraid of my bubbles? Like, and you see like a hammerhead shark coming to your eye level, and you're going like, oh yeah, he's more afraid of me than him. I am of him.
Well, so you have been diving with them then.
I've been lucky enough in the course of this work to have incredible adventures all around the world with animals, and very close encounters in many cases, filming. We're very often taking our ambassadors to get them exposed to the thing and filming it. And so, yeah, I mean, I've been super, super lucky in having incredible encounters with wildlife. And very often I'm working with the top scientists or people like that. So I'm getting behind the scenes in scenarios that normal people can't get into. So I've been very blessed with that. And we've been very blessed, actually, when we've had all these things, that we've always, the wildlife's always showed up for us, almost every occasion that, things have gone well for us with the animals, which of course is completely unpredictable. But we did an ad once underwater where we had people eating a meal on the bottom of the ocean, supposedly without any aqua lungs, but the tank is hidden under the table. And we're trying to film this, and we're like, oh, this is going to be really difficult. And we managed to get a shark swim right through the table in between them. And then at the end, we were trying to get a shot with a fish bowl, a bowl that's shark fin soup. We wanted the shark to swim behind the bowl. And first of all, the shark went past one way, and he did a jaw extension, which is where they kind of push their jaws out like that, which is a very cool thing. And he did it right on shot, right on cue. And then he turned around and came back, and he came to the bowl of shark fin soup, and he just knocked it over with his nose as if to get rid of it. At first take. And we're kind of like, well, we couldn't have trained that animal or had to do that. So, sometimes the animals are on your side and they know you're trying to help them.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, someone asked me 2 days ago when I was in their store, they saw I was going to be interviewing me and they wanted to know if you ever worked with any of the poaching that's going on in Florida, and I said, well, I really don't know, but. So
we don't tend to do those investigations anymore. And, the thing about here in the States is it's been a bit cut back by government cutbacks, but, we have some excellent agencies here, whether it's the Fish and Game or here in California, for example, it's probably a Florida Fish and Game, or whether it's Fish and Wildlife on the federal level. And these really are top-notch agencies, probably the best in the world at doing this. And so here, if anybody, suspects or sees something like that, they need to report it. And usually the action will be taken. And many of these countries we're talking about don't have any specialized wildlife agencies. And so, it's left to the general police and the customs. And very often they don't understand the laws about wildlife. They can't identify the animals. They don't know what's legal or illegal. And so there is very little enforcement. But generally speaking, here in the US, it's pretty good. And if people see products they think are illegal, then just do get in touch with either your state Fish and Game or Fish and Wildlife. And they're always looking for information, and they usually will go and act and find out something behind it. We are a big consumer of wildlife in different ways because obviously we've got a massive economy. And we've got a lot of cultural diversity in this country. So there's all kinds of bushmeat sometimes comes into New York, and people buy turtle eggs and things, to eat. And there's all these various things. There's some traditional medicine comes in from China, that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, the enforcement and education here has been pretty good. I think the biggest danger from here is when people go abroad and they'll see things that might be on sale and maybe don't even look like the animal. So, turtle shell things, people might not even realize this is from a turtle, and buy it and think, oh, this is cute and this is true, and they bring it back. And then, if Fish and Wildlife find it, they have to confiscate it. So I think the thing is to be careful when you're going abroad that things that might be openly on sale there, if it's a wildlife product, it at least has to be declared coming in here. And when you come back to the United States, you sign a form which says, I'm not carrying, you've got your drugs or whatever. There's a list of things, firearms and things, and one of them is Fish and Wildlife. And so if you buy anything that may be wildlife, you need to declare that at very least. I mean, I would generally say don't buy wildlife products internationally because, you might get it wrong. But if you're going to do it, then you're supposed to declare it when you come in. And then they'll tell you whether it's illegal or not. And usually if it's illegal, they'll take it away from you. If it's seen as commercial, then you'll be in trouble.
Goodness, yes, of course. Well, turtles I love. Of course, here I'm just dealing with the little turtles. I'm forever stopping my car and saving a turtle out of the road. But I love sea turtles. I haven't really had any experience with them, but
If
yeah.
you go to Hawaii, it's incredible how they've come back in Hawaii because they've been protected, and you can snorkel there, and they'll come right by you, and it's a real thrill. And so these animals, if we actually just kind of give them a bit of help, they can come back. Things like rhinos, for example, there's no shortage of habitat for rhinos. There's plenty of rhino habitat. The trouble is they've been poached for their horn, and so there's vast areas. I went to one valley, and people say, "Oh, we used to have 5,000 rhino in this area, and they're all gone." But having said that, they are starting to come back now. Rhinos, if we protect them, they will be able to repopulate these areas and play their role in the ecosystem.
Right, exactly. Well, you have so many different programs. I'm curious as to, do you have is there a particular area that you have a big soft spot for, particular animal or?
I try and make the soft spot whatever the priority is at the moment, to be honest. So, I mean, I love sharks. I love whale sharks. And then, recently I've fallen in love with pangolins because they're just so cute and, and so innocent. And it's just like crazy that we would, obliterate these little cute, totally harmless animals that all they do is eat ants and termites, which helps us, right? Because they're pests. And we're just going to let them go. So, but I think, in terms of experiences, it's pretty hard to beat a herd of elephants, being near a herd or a big bull elephant, who massive thing that will come up to you and literally look at you like a few feet away and go like, whatever, and just hang out with you. It's a really, I think, almost religious experience to be in the presence of such a powerful, huge animal that, just is curious to see what you're up to.
Yeah. Oh, I think an elephant. I would love to see an elephant, pet an elephant, because I've always had, admired them and thought they were. I mean, you see them on TV programs and then the circus. They seem so cute. They're so big, but they seem so, especially the little baby.
When you see the interaction between them and the family, it's a family unit, and the cousins and the aunts will look after the baby. You can see them trading off, taking care of the baby and looking after it and all this. And I think there's another thing. You look into the eye, you see intelligence. And I think there's certain animals, and I say, African grey parrots are like this. And chimpanzees, a lot of the apes, you look into those eyes, you see something looking back at you beyond just an animalistic stare. There's emotion, there's some deeper intelligence in there. I once remember with the parrot where, parrots obviously mimic, but this parrot would escalate laughing. So if you went, parrot go, ah, ha, ha, and then he goes, you laugh a bit more, and then it gets higher and higher, and it's laugh, and it increases the laugh. It's like egging you on to laugh more. And when you go and see those parrots in the wild, which I've done in a palm swamp in Ghana, they're coming in, and there's literally hundreds of parrots. They're squeaking, they're squawking, they're whistling, they're making all these sounds. You can see there's like incredible communication going on between them. It's not just one call or two things. They're having a conversation. And that's kind of, really, I think, humbling to see that.
Right. Well, I think I've got to go to Africa at some point.
I would recommend it to everyone, not just for the animals, but the people are wonderful. They're so friendly and helpful and charming. And, it's this notion that people think it's this dangerous, terrible place. And it's like, no, this is a really wonderful place to be in. And people are so nice and so welcoming of people coming into their country, and they're proud to show you their wildlife. And it is a life-changing experience. The first time I went, it feels like almost stepping back primevally, that we all came from there, right, originally. And you kind of feel that the first time you go there and you see like a giraffe wandering along, and then an elephant comes, and it's like, oh my God, what is this? But it kind of feels like you're going home in some weird way.
Yeah. Oh, I've got to go there because I've interviewed so many artists in South Africa that are now Facebook friends of mine. And so I mean,
the light is incredible. The sunsets are incredible. The light is incredible. There's the smell of the earth when you get there. I mean, I go and I travel, sometimes it takes 2 days to get there. And I wake up and I get there like 5 a.m. in the morning, and then I can drive out and be in the bush, and I feel like I'm ready to go because it's just such a change. And it's so beautiful and inspiring.
Yeah, I've got to go. I'm going to have to. But is there a particular area that needs more attention than another right now that you would say, or just?
Well, I mean, my big priority right now is Nigeria, just because it's such a crucial thing in the illegal ivory trade and pangolins, and then this bushmeat trade, and it is kind of a regional superpower. It's 200 million people, and if we can flip Nigeria into being a really positive country for conservation, hopefully that'll help the whole West and Central African region. And there's a lot of what we've seen. We did the survey, the public wants to save the elephants, and it's like 50 lions left and 250 elephants. It's really pretty dire, but the public wants to help and wants to do it. The government seems kind of willing, and so if we can again just play this catalyst role of bringing people together, so the government agencies, the media, local celebrities, and getting them all together with like a campaign to make it happen. Make Nigeria great again. We can, for wildlife, we can make a big change, I think. And it's always exciting when you see, you go there and people are like, yeah, we want to do it. We want to do it. It's like, great. So if we all pull together, we can make this happen. So that for me is a priority right now. In Asia, we're doing a lot of stuff in Vietnam. And we see Vietnam potentially as a leadership country across Southeast Asia, because again, these bushmeat markets, which are the problem, that was in China, we think they've addressed that legally right now. But Southeast Asia has those markets. People eat bats and various things and monkeys, which are not a good idea. So that is a priority region for us as well.
Right. Well, I know I wanted you just to mention a little bit on your award, the associate. Am I pronouncing it like laureate? Is it
laureate? Yeah,
laureate.
Yeah. That was a wonderful honor, and it's. I mean, it's what it really helps with is you need to fund this work. You can't. It doesn't pay. You have to raise money to do it, and things like that really help in your recognition, and people draw attention to help you raise those funds. And a lot of the work is that raising the funds. I'd say at least probably 50% of it is getting the money to be able to do the things that you then have to go and do. And so that was really, really helpful with that. And we were lucky in that we have a lot of the stuff donated, as I've mentioned, so we don't have to raise all that 200 million. But you always still need the money to fund the productions, to get there, to do billboards, for example. We pay for the printing. They give us the billboard. We have to pay for the printing. So there's always cost associated. And so you have to raise that money. And we've been lucky enough, 4 years now, we've had 100% rating from Charity Navigator, which is kind of a charity watchdog, which assesses, organizations on their transparency and their efficiency and how much they spend on fundraising. And we've been getting that 100% rating, which is incredible. And so that helps people to know that their money is going to be spent on the programs and not all on admin or fundraising and things like that. So, but it's always an ongoing thing. It's like if you're a company, it's like you're capitalizing every single year. You're not just getting it each year. You have to raise your capital again and again and again, and it's a lot of the job.
Right. Well, I'm glad because that was one of my questions. I wanted you to make people more comfortable, because I know in my years of talking, even when my parents died of cancer, they didn't want people to give to certain charities because they didn't, And so I think it's good for people to hear where that money goes.
Well, things like the Charity Navigator are useful for that. I mean, my advice on giving is don't just give to the biggest name. Right. So, if you hear this big name that everybody knows and things, look into it, because very often the reason that name is known is they spend a huge amount of money on marketing, which obviously isn't going to the cause that you're trying to support. So my advice is to dig a little bit deeper, and things like Charity Navigator, there's other websites which assess GuideStar, assess charities. That's a good place to start, because you at least find out, if it's legit. And every year, all legit charities have to do a 990, which is a form we have to give the government to get audited. And that has all the financial information anyone wants to see. But really also look at what are the people actually doing in a charity? What is their real activities? And try and find something that's strategic and smart and leveraged, and not just something which is, a lot of stuff is disguised as work and it's actually just fundraising. So that would be my advice to people on charities. Just do a little bit of homework. Now with the internet, it's pretty easy. You can look at websites, you can look at the 990, which you don't have to be a financial wizard to understand. There's some pretty clear line items about how much you spend on things. You can pretty quickly have a look and go like, okay, that's great. That's a legit charity. And then ask people around, ask people about different charities you may not have heard of.
Yeah, because I didn't know about yours until Chris, and after the interview, I just asked him, and he said, and then he even in the interview, he said, WildAid is one of the ones you can trust, and so that's how I found you. I said, well, then I want to go there.
I think you have to look at us, and you see all the people that have worked with us over the years, all those celebrities that I've mentioned. And those people aren't going to work with something that's not legit, right? I mean, they all have reputations, and they're not going to jeopardize that reputation. That's a legit organization, but there's a lot of really excellent small and medium-sized charities out there that are very well run and are really doing the work, but they don't have the money to do big advertising campaigns or PR and things like that. And so my advice is, if you're interested in a topic, is do a little bit of research and don't just go for the number one, the brand. Have a look beyond that and say, like, well, okay, what about this kind of approach or that kind of approach? What would be a smart approach to trying to solve the problem you're trying to solve?
Right. Well, how can a person get involved with WildAid if they wanted to, besides just donations or?
Well, I mean, you go to the website. We do have volunteers in San Francisco. People sometimes will do things like they'll organize a party or a virtual party, as we do now, to get other people engaged locally and involved. And there's some ideas and stuff on the website you can have a look at. And, we have little sort of volunteers that in different places that do little WildAid event or WildAid fundraiser or something like that. Obviously, people can communicate to people about the wildlife products and avoiding the wildlife products on a one-on-one basis as well. I mean, really, just advising people that may be going abroad or shown interest in buying some kind of wildlife product, about learning a little bit more about where it comes from and what's behind it.
Okay, that's great because I mean, I think that's interesting to know. I think a lot of people would like to get more involved, but they really don't know how to do it.
Well, it's difficult with our work because most of it is abroad. I mean, part of the reason, you probably haven't heard of WildAid is because most of the stuff we're doing is in China or in Asia. So we're quite well known in China, but again, it's that doesn't necessarily bring us money, but it brings us the impact. And so our focus has been on the impact rather than building some massive empire or some massive organization. And so, we don't spend very much money on marketing at all or fundraising. But a lot of organizations do. And especially if you get like direct mail, for example, people that are sending you the envelopes every month and things. I mean, most of that money goes to pay to send envelopes to other people, right? It doesn't go to the cause. And so, as I say, as a giver, I would be smart in your giving. And we do like one mail a year to our supporters. We don't do random mass mailings to people. It's just not a very efficient way of raising money.
Right. Yeah. Well, you have expeditions in Africa and the Galapagos.
Not this year. Not this year. Yeah, no, we do.
Not this year. But are you ever one of the guides, or is that?
Well, no, that I am the guide at this point. So these are very, very exclusive events because we're not really in the tourism business, right? So they're usually for our major donors. And what we do is we take people out to see, the products, the projects on the ground and hopefully inspire them, but we have partners in all these places where, we're doing our work, but we're also in some cases giving a bit of funding and support and promotion to other great on the ground projects. And so, in Galapagos, we've had a long history in Galapagos. We haven't really talked about this, but our marine program, it focuses on helping marine parks, marine protected areas on enforcement. Because in a lot of marine enforcement, marine protected areas are literally just a line on a map. And then someone's drawn a line and it's like, okay, this is not allowed fishing in here. And that's it. There's nobody making sure people are respecting that. And so Galapagos Marine Reserve is about the size of New York State. It's a massive, massive area around the famous Galapagos Islands. And when we started 20 years ago now, they literally had one boat that was broken down as the only mechanism of stopping people fishing in this area. And so now we've worked with them over the years with training, capacity building. They now have a satellite vessel monitoring system, which literally, like an air transponder, tracks the fishing boats. And interestingly, they're all stacked right on the outskirts of the marine reserve, but not coming in, which is like, perfect enforcement, basically. And we've given them all these other techniques and other capacity to make this a really truly protected area. And so from that, we've seen kind of, shark numbers push back, and there was a lot of shark finning before that's come back. And it's now one of the best protected marine areas in the world. And so what we're doing there is that capacity building and building up real protection. So it doesn't just become a paper part, but it actually helps conserve that wildlife. And of course, the thing about that is if you do that, it's like a bank. Fish still swim out. So actually the fishermen end up, in some cases, catching more fish because you've given them a safe place to breed, a safe place to grow, and then they go out and the fishermen catch them. And so it can actually enhance the actual fishing catch while conserving like this breeding area for the fish so that they don't get wiped out.
Right. Well, on your, I just have one more question for you, Peter, because I know I've kept you a while. Is there something that you would like to do that you have not been able to accomplish with WildAid for the future? Is there a...
That's a big question. I would love to, my long-term dream and goal would be that the illegal wildlife trade becomes so marginalized that it doesn't threaten any species anymore. So I'd love to make it to the point where we're not really worried about illegal wildlife trade in terms of species surviving. And I could go and sit in Africa and take nice pictures of animals with a good conscience, knowing that, there was nothing left to be done. So, that's one level, very, very focused on the wildlife. I mean, I would love to, be able to also help make the world more aware about climate change and what we can do about that. Because I think I have children, and I think we're kind of, we're leaving. We used to worry about things like apartheid and stuff, and thankfully that went, and then Russia and an invasion of when I was growing up. And now these guys have this existential threat of climate change, which isn't just a theory. We're here in California, we've had these fires. I mean, we've had like 2 days of rain this year, and it's dry as hell, and this is not good for anyone. And so we need to start taking action. And to me, as an economist, it gets back to my economic training. It's so blindingly obvious that coming out of COVID, we need to rejig our economy to a low carbon economy. And it's what we can stimulate and get jobs for people, get them back to work. You can't retrain a coal miner to be a Google, whiz, but you can train that person to put solar panels on a roof and then give them a good job going forward. And that's where we should be going. So rather than seeing this huge burden, see this as an economic opportunity for the United States to lead the world in this new low carbon technology. And that will be the next economic boom, and we should be on it. And hopefully that's where we can go.
Good. Well, I like your plan, your dream. And I did forget to ask, is your wife heavily involved in this with you, or?
Yes, very much so. She's really an incredible fundraiser, and so she organizes our gala. She goes on the trips with me, and she does a lot of the donor support and things like that. So no, she's been incredible. And she was, she didn't start working for the organization until 10 years ago, but even before that, she was, dedicated to doing this and had to put her life into it. So no, she's done an incredible job, and it keeps us both busy.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, I'm so glad that you were here today. I really want to thank you so much for being here today, Peter. And I could keep you here all day. Is there anything else that we didn't mention that you wanted to cover or announce?
No, I mean, I just really our big campaign right now is this. We're calling it. If we're stopping wildlife trade, we can stop pandemics, right? So we're trying to slightly rejig our messaging to say that stopping wildlife trade is not just about saving animals, it's also about protecting ourselves. And I think this is hopefully this horrible cloud of COVID, which has been so bad for so many people. Hopefully there's a tiny silver lining, and that we might be able to learn a lesson and move away from this live animal trade. And that could be something which will not only save hundreds of millions of animals, but it will also protect ourselves and our economies. And so that to me is a kind of a time in history we have this opportunity. So, we want to take it full on. We've already got campaigns going, but we'd love people to help and support that campaign.
Right. Well, good. Sure. And I want to thank the viewers here today for their continued support. Make sure that you share this interview, and so that people can make donations at your site at wildaid.org. And donations are always great.
Always well. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can learn a lot more about what Peter's doing. I learned a lot on that website, just spending some time on it. So, and I want the viewers to join me after the holidays for more live interviews with really fabulous people from all around the world. And to your own success, just keep on rocking it.
So be safe, everybody, and happy holidays.
Yeah. Okay, Hank.